Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 15th of January, and we're getting ready for Parshas Shemos. And I hope to share a couple of sources with you today that I hope you'll find meaningful. So we're gonna break today into two parts. The first part, we're gonna see three different approaches to the same issue. Let's see what that is. So we're right at the beginning of the parsha, and we're told the pasuk tells us 15 psukim in Tesvav that a new king has risen up, and there's all sorts of angst that he has about the Jewish people, and he's looking to set the situation up that the Jewish people won't be this threat that he envisions them to be. So Pasuk Tesvav says, "Vayomer Melech Mitzrayim lemialdos evrios." So the king of Egypt, Paro, says to the Jewish midwives, "Asher Shema Chas Shifra." One of them's name was Shifra. Rashi tells us, we'll soon see this, he's going to be quoted. Rashi tells us Shifra was a nickname for who? Was Yocheved. Well, that was Moshe's mom. And Vishem Hashenis, and the second midwife, her name was Pua, and Pua was a nickname for Miriam. So we're told that there were these two, they were either the only two Jewish midwives, or they were the two, hello, or they were the two chief Jewish midwives. Not God, Paro reaches out to them because he's been so nervous about the Jewish people, and he's asked them to kill them. So what's going on? He says, He says, when you are helping the Jewish women give birth, and when you see them on the birthing stools or birthing stones, in Benhu, if you see that it's a son that they're going to give birth to, you are going to kill the little baby boy. But if it's a girl, then she can live. That was the decree that Paro passes, and he issues this to the Jewish midwives. Vatirana hamialdos es Elokim, but these midwives, they feared God. V'lo asu kasher diber alehem melech Mitzrayim, and they refused to do what the king of Egypt had asked them to do. Vatechayena es hayeladim, and they allowed those little boys to live, even though they were ordered to kill them if they were going to be male. They allowed them to live. They defied Paro's orders. A little bit later, Pasuk Chaf 21 says, Vayiki Yaru Amialdos Eselokim, and it was because these midwives feared God and they allowed the boys to live. Vayas Lehem Batim. Therefore, God rewarded them by making houses for them. So, what does it mean that God made houses for them? We're going to see Rashi quotes the Gemara that it doesn't mean a literal house. It doesn't mean that the reward was that they listened to God rather than Paro. They allowed the boys to live. Therefore, they had a roof over their head. That's not what it means when it says God made them houses. Rather, Rashi quotes the Gemara and says, what does it mean, Vayas lam batim, that God made for them houses? Bate kahuna ulevia umalchus. God gave them three houses, meaning that they would be the progenitors of kahuna, that means priesthood, Levia, all the Levites, Umalchus, and also the royal family. The Davidic dynasty was going to stem from them. Shakri and Batim, all these are called houses. In other words, because we could say a house means, the literal house people live in, or we say this is the house of the kahuna, meaning like this is the whole chain, the whole dynasty of kahuna, the whole dynasty of Levium, the whole dynasty of kingship. That's what's being referred to as houses. And it says Kamosha Kasuv, and you could actually see this. This shows up in Malachim Aleph. It says Livnos es Beis Hashem, es Beis Hamelech. It talks about building the house of God and also the house of the king. That's what it means. The house of the king means the whole kingly line. Kedisa Mesachas Sota, and this is Mesachas Sota. Now, where do we see that Yocheved, who is Shifra, and Pua, who is Miriam, where do we see that they are the progenitors of Kahuna, Levia, and Malchus? So Rashi concludes by telling us Kahuna, Levia, Yocheved. Yocheved, she ends up being the mother of all Kohanim and Levium. Why? Because think about it. All of the Levium, it doesn't necessarily mean all, because again, there were other from Levi out there, but anyone who's going to be a descendant of Moshe, rather, Levium, because they're descendants of Moshe, that's going to come through her. Kahuna is definitely coming from her because Kohanim are Aaron, and Aaron is the son of Yocheved. And Umalchus, where do we know kingship's going to come from? That's Miriam. That's going to come out of Miriam, because Miriam ends up marrying into Shevet Yehuda, and we'll soon see that through Miriam, that is going to be the Davidic line is going to come through her. So that is their reward. Now we're going to see three different sources here, all bothered by the same question. The question is as follows. We know that Hashem deals with our world in a fashion that's called Mida Keneged Mida, measure for measure. So here, if we're seeing that Yocheved and Miriam are being rewarded for having allowed the boys to live, that implies that their reward somehow or another mirrors their actions. Having the Kohanim, Leviim, and Malchus come from them has something to do with the fact that it's measure for measure. They defied Paro's order. Therefore, this is their just rewards. The question is, where's the Mida Keneged Mida? So we're going to see three different ways to explain this. The first that I want to share with you is on the bottom of page 1. Now, I want to preface this. There is a commentary, it's sometimes a mystical commentary to the Chumash, and it was written by, it's always referred to as the Alshech. The Alshech was Rabbi Moshe Alshech, and he wrote a very lengthy, verbose commentary to the Chumash. It's referred to as a mystical commentary. The challenge of the Alshech is it's very, very wordy, and it's not usually broken up into clean, concise paragraphs unless you find a new printing of it. So oftentimes I've had a hard time ever clawing my way through the Alshech, but every now and then people will quote the Alshech, and I'll trust them because I'll say, okay, they made their way through it. And this is one example like that. I saw a commentary. There's a commentary on Rashi that's known as the Mizrahi. Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi is a commentary on Rashi. And I looked at the Mizrahi to try to see, did he have anything on this Rashi? Because again, we're seeing this Rashi that quoted the Gemara in Sota, and the Gemara there says that they were rewarded for saving the boys by getting these three households, Kahuna, Leviah, and Malchus. So I was looking to see, did the Mizrahi address this? And I did not see that the Mizrahi addresses. However, in his footnotes and this new edition of the Mizrahi, I saw they quote the Alshech that addresses this. So what we're going to see here on the bottom of this page here is from the footnotes in a new edition of the Mizrahi on the Torah. I tried looking this up in the Alshech himself. And again, the challenge that I found is that the Alshech is just very, very wordy. I couldn't find where in the Alshech this was, but I'm going to trust the one who put together those footnotes. Let's see what he says. Where is the Mida Keneged Mida? Why is it that for saving the baby boys, God says, you know what your just rewards are going to be? That you're going to have the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the kings come from you. So he says, Mevur ba'Alshech HaKadosh. You'll find this written over in the explanation of the Holy Alshech. Ki Shifra hi Yocheved. Who was Shifra? That was Yocheved. Shaisab Mishaperes Esavlad. Rashi tells us earlier that why were they given the nicknames Shifra and Yocheved? Shifra and Pua, rather. Shifra was given the nickname Shifra Shemisha Peres Esavlad, that she would make the child look nice, that the child could have been a mess, and she would clean the kid up, make the child look nice for the mother. Therefore, Yatsu Mimanu Bate Kahuna Levia. That's why it was just that she should have come out of her, Kohanim and Leviim. Why? Shemisha Primes Yisrael Mikir Chataeam. What did the Kohanim and Leviim do? They were the ones who ministered in the Beis HaMikdash, and first in the Mishkan, later in the Beis HaMikdash. And through the Avoda, they helped clean us up from all of our sins. In other words, what was she doing? Yocheved, she's called Shifra. She's cleaning up all these little kids, making them look sweet and lovable so their mom could love them even though they've been in such a mess. So too, that's what the Kohanim and Leviim were doing. We've messed up. We've made bad choices, bad decisions, and they're helping us clean ourselves up. So there's the Mida Keneged Mida. You went ahead, not only did you save those little boys, but you cleaned them up, so your descendants will do that for Bnei Yisrael. And then he says, "Korbanos v'shirei zimra." How do they help clean up Bnei Yisrael? Through helping us bring korbanos and all the special singing that they had in the Beis Hamikdash. That was the songs of Zimra. So all that helped clean us up. That was the Mida Keneged Mida. But what about Miriam? Miriam was nicknamed Pua. What's her zechus that she has kings coming from her? So he writes, "Pua he Miriam." So again, Rashi earlier says Pua is a nickname for Miriam. Shaisa po'el liyoladim l'chazkam. She would coo, she would make all sorts of nice noises for the kids to give them encouragement and to give them strength. Yotza mimenu malchus beis David hamachzik es Yisrael. Therefore, it comes out of her the kingdom of David, who also gives strength to Klal Yisrael, encourages and strengthens Klal Yisrael. Ein shamo bidvar bahar chava. Look there for a much lengthier explanation. So again, I couldn't find that in the Alshech. I'm taking his words for it. But you see what he's addressing is he's addressing how is it Mida Keneged Mida. That's how the Alshech wants to address it. Let's see a second approach. A second approach here on page 2. This is from Rabbi Matas Blum Zichrono Livracha. In his Sefer Torah Ladas, he brings down something fascinating in the name of, I believe, the Brisker Rav. So let's see what it says. It says, in Benu Vamitenoso, Paro ordered the Mialdos that if it is a boy, he should be put to death. If it's a girl, you can let her live. Vatirena mialdos es Elokim, the mialdos, they feared God, v'lo asu kasher diber aleihem melech Mitzrayim, and they would not do what the king of Egypt had asked of them, v'techayen es eladim, they allowed the boys to live. Ulalong ksiv, and a little bit later, a couple of psukim later, it says, vayiki yerua mialdos Elokim, since there was that the midwives feared God, vayaslam batim, therefore he established these houses. Perish Rashi, what were these houses? Bate kahuna, levia, umalchus, ayin sham. So he says, we know that God deals in our world mida keneged mida, measure for measure. In Kain yesh layin, therefore we have to investigate. Ma'isa mida keneged mida kan. So again, the same issue. What's the mida keneged mida? They saved the little boys, so therefore they get Kohanim, Leviim, and Malchus. What does that mean? I love this answer. Let's what he says. V'tiretz hagon Rev Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. So that was the Brisker Rav. So Reb Velvel, they would sometimes call him. So he says the Brisker Rav answers as follows: the Paro Gazar Rak Al Ben Hayilod Sheargu. What did Paro decree? The boys or girls were going to be killed. Which one? The boys. So then what was going to be with all the girls? So he says V'lo Albanos. He never decreed the girls were going to be killed. But Kaimalanan, what do we know? It's established fact. The Akum Abba Bas Yisrael. If let's say a non-Jew lives together, is intimate with a Jewish girl, and they produce a child, is that child considered Jewish or not? Child is. As long as the mom is Jewish, the child is Jewish. So Paro's decree was Jewish boys are going to be killed. What happens to all those Jewish girls now? Who do they marry? Non-Jews. What are those children considered? Jews. So he says as follows. He says, "V'kaimlan, we've established the Akum Abal Bas Yisrael Avlad Yisrael. Vim came, therefore, even if Paro's decree somehow would have come to fruition, that all the little boys would have been killed, would there still have been a Klal Yisrael? Yeah, there would have been a Jewish people. They would have had Egyptian fathers, but there would have been a Jewish people. Klal Yisrael Hayakayim, they would have lived. However, Amnon, there's a couple segments within the Jewish people that never would have lived. Which segments are dependent on the father? And Malchus Yehuda. So that's what he's saying. He goes, you want to find the Mida Keneged Mida? Here's the Mida Keneged Mida. Had Paro's decree, evil decree, come to fruition, would there have been an Am Yisrael? Yes. It would have been a wounded Am Yisrael because they wouldn't have had Jewish fathers. They would have had Egyptian fathers, but they would have been considered Jewish. But you know which three branches never would have existed? There wouldn't have been Kohanim, Leviim, or the Davidic dynasty. He says, Amnam Kahuna Levia Holechas Basarav. Kahuna Levia, that's patrilineal. Umalchus Trichalios Minam Yuchsim, and Malchus also. That has to have great yichus, that has to have great pedigree also coming from the father. That's what Paro was really trying to destroy in this decree. Nimtza, so comes out to mitoch mesiras nefesh al hamiyaldos, through the self-sacrifice of these midwives. Hitzlichu lekayem kahuna levia umalchus v'Yisrael. Their dedication, their resolve not to follow through on Paro's command ensured that there would be Kohanim, ensured that there would be Leviim, ensured that there would be a Malchus Yisrael. L'chein, therefore, nitnu lahen mida keneged mida. God specifically says, it's going to come through them, through Yocheved and through Miriam. That'll be the source of Kahuna, Levia, and Malchus. Sheyotze mehan bate Kahuna, Levia, Malchus. So I love this. I think that's a very, very clever answer, what he's doing there. Is he's saying, yeah, had Paro's evil decree come to fruition, there would have been a Jewish people, but there wouldn't have been these three segments that have to be patrilineal. They would have been all Jewish, But these three, I guess, call it these three divisions that even though they're Jewish, can only be passed down from a patrilineal sense. They were totally responsible for Yocheved and Miriam by letting those boys live. Therefore, it's only just that should come from them. That's how I thought. I thought that's a very nice twist.
I think there's other midwives who did follow the orders.
So it's very interesting you ask that, because it's not. It sounds very hard to believe that in the entire Jewish people, there's only two midwives. So that I would imagine that there's some of the commentaries who learn it's just impossible. How could two midwives have serviced everybody? Especially you've got this large nation that Paro's nervous that they're growing by leaps and bounds. How are two midwives going to take care of everyone? So I would imagine that there must have been more, and they must have been, the ones, the chiefs who were responsible. But we never hear of anyone, Paro's decree following through. But yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to imagine that it was only two. I don't know. Let's see one more approach. This is in that Sefer Tam V'das. This is Reb Moshe Sternbach in Yerushalayim. So he offers one more approach to what might the Mida Keneged Mida be. It says, V'nira od b'pshitus bir divrei Chazal. He says, I think there's a very simple way to approach this from what Chazal say. Shama yaldos masr nafsham lahatzil yaldei Yisrael. These miyaldos, these midwives, really risked their own lives to save the Jewish boys. Therefore, since they were willing to risk their lives, there was great mesiras nefesh. Zachu l'kahuna levia. That's why they merited to have kohanim and leviim. Shagam behem yesh mesiras nefesh. There's an incredible amount of self-sacrifice that goes on the part of leviim and kohanim in the days of the Beis Hamikdash. Shem bebeis Hashem tamid. They give up a life of agriculture, a life of commerce. They give that all up to be in the Beis Hashem, to be the servants of Hashem, and to lead the avoda. Vein lem nachla sada v'cherem. They don't have an inherited plot of land. They don't have fields. They don't have vineyards. So therefore, they act with great mesiras nefesh. So he's saying the Mida Keneged Mida is that here it was, Yocheved and Miriam acted with great mesiras nefesh. It's only fitting that they should have descendants who are going to also display an incredible amount of mesiras nefesh by working as Kohanim and Leviim and not having an agricultural inheritance. And they also were merited to have kingship. What does a good king do? They're concerned about every individual. They're looking out. They're not living a life of luxury, just eating bonbons all day. They're sitting there wondering, what can we do for average Joe and average Jill? What can we do to help them with all of the challenges they face in life? That's what a real melech does. That's what we expect of a Jewish king, not to be living in the lap of luxury, not to be living above the people, but to be looking out for the people. That's an incredible amount of mesiras nefesh as well, to be a total servant of the people. So that's mesiras nefesh. So here it was that. So what he's suggesting is Yocheved and Miriam acted with great mesiras nefesh. The reward was that they would have children and descendants, entire households that would be built and all about functioning with mesiras nefesh, with great self-sacrifice. That's his suggestion. I thought that's very interesting. All right, I want to share with you now, we're going to move into the second part of today. Second part of today, I'm going to tell you is something a little shocking, but we're going to use that. Let's just jump right in. Okay, so chapter 2 in Shemos begins that Moshe is in Midian. He was forced to flee Egypt because he was standing up for the Jewish people. And he finds himself in Midian, and he's a shepherd for his father-in-law Yisro. And while he's out in the field, he has this experience at the sneh, the burning bush, and that's where God gives him the mission, reveals himself and gives him the mission to go to Egypt and to be the redeemer of the Jewish people. So the pasuk tells us right before Moshe has that vision, or that witnesses that experience of the burning bush, it says, "Vayiba yamim harabim hahem." It was in those many days. Vayamas melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt died. Vayeyanchu b'nei Yisrael min avodah. And now the Jewish people, they sighed, they groaned from all the terrible work. Vayizaku, and they cried out, Vatal Shavasam El Elokim, and their cry ascended to God, Mina Avoda, from the labor. So we're told that the king of Egypt died. Rashi quotes here the Gemara that says, or the Medrash rather, that he didn't really die. It's kind of a figure of speech. Vayamas Melech Mitzrayim nitztara. He came down with a terrible skin ailment. I wouldn't say it was leprosy as we know it. It was some type of terrible skin ailment. Vayashochet tinakos Yisrael. And his doctors told him the only cure would be you have to slaughter Jewish kids, verochetz b'damam, and bathe in their blood. That's the only treatment that we have for your skin, for this terrible skin ailment you have. That's what it is. And that's what caused the Jewish people to groan and cry out from the terrible oppression that they were facing, knowing that, okay, until now we were working as slave laborers, but now it's to the point where things are so bad that he's shechting the kids and bathing in their blood. That's what caused them to cry out to Hashem and pour their hearts out in prayer to God. So we're going to look now on page 3 at a piece from a sefer called Meged Yosef. Meged Yosef was written by Rabbi Yosef Saratskin. I keep meaning to find out from one of my brothers in Telstone a little bit more about him, but he was a grandson of the Rabbi Saratskin that we often quote, the Aznaim LaTorah. So I believe he's still living. I think he's an older Talmud Chacham. I think he lives in Telstone in Israel. That's why I want to check with one of my brothers. I just keep forgetting. God willing, I'll email him today. But I've seen him quoted a number of times recently, so I got his sefer, and I've been finding some very nice Divrei Torah in his sefer, and today I want to share one with you, and we're going to use that as a jumping board because I saw something that he writes here is kind of shocking. I'd never seen before. I'm gonna share that with you. So he says, "Vayamas Melech Mitzrayim." He's going on our pasuk that the king of Egypt died, and the way Rashi explained it, based on the Medrash, was it didn't mean that he really died. What it meant was nitztara. He came down with saras. You might call it leprosy, some terrible skin ailment. V'hayashochet tinokos Yisrael. He was shechting. His doctors advised him he's got to shech Jewish kids, Jewish babies, v'rochetz b'damam, and then bathe in their blood. So that's his quote. Now he says, Od Rabos Misupar v'chazal. There are more terrible things that are written by Chazal. The incredible amount of cruelty that the Egyptians had to the Jewish slaves. And this is just one of them. One of them was, at this point, they were shechting Jewish kids so he could bathe in their blood. But what else have we heard about? The Torah tells us, Zarku Tinokos Layar, that at a certain point, based on the advice of his astrologers, they start throwing live kids, throwing them to drown in a river. It's terrible. And also we're told by Chazal, Hishtamshu bem lebinyan b'makom levenim, that if the Jewish slaves ever did not produce enough bricks, they just took a couple kids and shoved them in there to use them as bricks in the walls. So there were some terrible, terrible acts of cruelty that the Egyptians were committing against the Jewish slaves that they had. Me'idach Gisa, on the third line, he says, but on the other side of the coin, Omrim Chazal, our sages tell us, Shemitzrim nazru es atzmam me'achilas basar, that the Egyptians refrained from eating meat, mishum tsar ba'alei chayim, because they were so concerned about tsar ba'alei chayim, causing pain to animals. Now, this was new to me. I had never heard of this before. The Torah tells us that the Egyptians really, really detested shepherds, and Chazal explained that to me, specifically sheep. People who were shepherds of sheep, and that was because the Egyptians, in their form of worship, they had elevated sheep to a form of a deity, and that was based on the fact that they thought the constellation up in the heavens that really was their constellation was Aries, which is a ram. So they said, we don't want to get that constellation mad, so we got to really respect its earthly representative. And the baby, what's a baby ram, is a sheep. So therefore they started showing great reverence to sheep, and that's how the cult of Egyptian sheep worship takes off. And that's why they wouldn't eat sheep, and they were disgusted by shepherds. That's why they wouldn't sit at the same table with Yosef when he was making those meals and all that. Fine. I never saw that they extended this beyond sheep. I assumed that we've seen some commentators say that Potiphar was the Sara Tabachim, which either can mean chief executioner or it can mean chief butcher, which would mean that, okay, Paro did have meat. He just didn't eat sheep. So again, this was news to me, but apparently he's quoted, and I was trying to find this week any source. I couldn't find any source, but apparently he's saying that it wasn't just sheep that the Egyptians wouldn't eat, but anything that they had deified, any animal that they had deified, they wouldn't eat, and that would include other forms of flesh as well. Now he's saying here that it's because of Tsar Bali Chaim. Again, I don't know what that means. I would have always assumed from the sources I saw, if they weren't eating meat, it wasn't because they were concerned about cruelty, but rather they didn't want to instigate the heavenly constellations and stuff of that nature. But I'm going to take him at his word here. He says that he's quoting a source that essentially says that the Egyptians would not eat flesh because they viewed that as Tsar Bali Chaim. So he's saying, look at what kind of a tortured human being these are. They're willing to take kids, shech them so Paro could bathe in their blood. They're willing to take kids and throw them live into a river to drown. They're willing to take kids and stuff them into a wall if the Jewish slaves didn't make enough bricks. But no, we're vegans. We're not going to eat any meat because that's Tsar Bali Chaim. He says this sounds wild. You'd wonder what kind of nutcase are we dealing with here? Problem is we see them around us very, very often. That's what we're going to see here. That's where I once remember hearing a rabbi point out, did you ever notice that some of the people who are most vocal about saving extinct species are the ones who will also be most vocal about protecting partial birth abortion or something like that? Like, how does that work? If you care that much about the spotted owl, shouldn't you care about this, kid that was, but it doesn't seem to translate that way. But anyhow, that's, so Rabbi Sorotskin is going to point this out. He says, here you have the Egyptians have the incredible cruelty when it comes to the Jews, yet, according to some source that I could not find, they wouldn't eat flesh based on Tsar Bali Chaim. He says, Achen, but truth be told, as bizarre as this sounds, Kvar Heid al Tufa Zu Hanavi Hosea. Hosea, the prophet Hosea, told us that such a warped mindset exists. He wrote in Hosea, he's one of our Nevi'im, in Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Beis, Zovchei Adam, Agalim Yishakun. Those who are willing to slaughter people, Agalim Yishakun, they are allowed to kiss the calf. So let's just, before we go further in Rabbi Sorotskin, I just want to show you this pasuk. I remember once hearing Rabbi Wine quote this, Beryl Wine quote this pasuk. I thought it was awesome. And then, but again, here it is. Here's the pasuk in Hosea. He's talking, Hosea is speaking. He says, Vata Yosifu Lachto. He's saying, you, the Jewish people, you continue to sin with all your idol worship. Vayasu Lem Masecha Mikaspam. You made these molten images. You made idols, and they were made out of your silver. Kitvunam atzabim, and according to their pattern, you made all sorts of deities. Ma'aseh Harashim Kulo, they're all work of craftsmen. Lahem Heim Omrim, and what do you say about them? Zovchei Adam Agalim Yishakun. Those who are willing to sacrifice man can kiss the calves. Rashi explains what did he mean there. He says as follows: Komrei Hamolach, the priests of the Molech, meaning the priests of this god that's demanding child sacrifice. In other words, those idol worshiping priests, Omrim li Yisrael, they would say to the Jews, Misha Zovech Benol Akum, anyone who's willing to sacrifice their child to this idol, Kedayu Lios Noshek Ha'ego, will allow them the big zechus of kissing the idol. In other words, you want to really achieve the highest strata here. We made these idols that are like egos, like calves. If you want to kiss, you can't just kiss that. You got to earn the right to kiss that idol. You want to know who kisses that idol? Those who are willing to sacrifice their children for it. If they're willing to slaughter and bring as a sacrifice their most precious possession, then they could go ahead and kiss the calf. That was what Hosea said the priests were doing, and there were Jews who were falling for it. That's what Hosea was decrying in his time. So, but it's kind of others have looked at this pasuk in Hosea and said, this is just the way it works. Zovchei Adam, you could have on the one hand people who are willing to slaughter humans, and then Agalim Yishakun, but they could show such love and care for calves that they're willing to kiss calves but slaughter humans. So back to Rabbi Sorotskin, what does he do with this? So in the middle of his lines, he quoted Hosea, and he says, She'ohavei Agalim, you could have real animal lovers. You could have people who love calves, Hamanashkim, so that they kiss them. Misugalim liyos zovchei adam. And that same person who's kissing that animal, they can be the same person who would slaughter a human being. In our own generations, we have seen, this is what, Eileen, you were saying. This is, or I think it was Eileen, you were just pointing out about the Nazis? Yeah, exactly. So Eileen, you said this. He says there's Eicha Germanim. Look how the Germans, Chovevei Achayos, they were renowned for how much they passed. Some of the first laws the Nazi party passed when they came to power were animal protection laws. Hoyu lachayos adam. But look what kind of wild animals they were when it came to people. To fa'azu to unabiyar. This mindset or this attitude requires explanation. It appears that, yeah, God cares. We're not allowed to cause undue harm or pain to animals. But we're not allowed to. We're commanded not to cause them pain, but we're not commanded to love them. In other words, the Torah wants us to view animals as they're a necessary tool. We need them for farm items. But we're not allowed to cause them pain, but we're not supposed to love them. Love is reserved for human beings. Where does the Torah say that we're commanded to love? When it comes to our fellow human. If someone goofs and they slip, they actually end up loving animals. The whole concept of love is so confused and crooked when it comes to them. That it'll end up that they'll be terribly cruel when it comes to human beings. We're going to explore this a little further, but I think I had seen this years ago, but I wanted to just bring something I found this week. Before I show you what I saw years ago, I want to show you what I found this week. Go to page 4. I found a really good article. I was doing some reading this week about what the Nazis and their love for animals versus how cruel they were to people. I found a really good article from Dennis Prager. Now, I'm not holding in all the Dennis Prager news, but I did see something recently that he's recovering from a really bad fall. He had a fall and hit his head. I don't know if it was a brain bleed or something like that, but I don't know if he's in a rehab facility now. But he was a really articulate person, Dennis Prager. He had an Orthodox background. I think he went through Yeshiva Flatbush in Brooklyn, New York. He's written a number of books. He's been a popular talk show host and interviewer. But I did hear this recently that he's recovering from, I don't know if it was a brain bleed or something.
What it was, it's just, we checked in on him.
Yeah. So I think what it was is he had a really bad fall and hit his head. But the question was, did he have a fall or did he have something? Did he have a heart attack and that's why he had the fall? I don't know what it was, but I heard he's in like in a rehab facility now. But anyhow, here's an article that I found that he wrote in 2007. I thought he makes an awesome point in this article. It's called "Cruelty to Animal Leads to Cruelty. Kindness to animals doesn't lead to kindness." So this is a really important point. Look what he says here. Nearly everyone acknowledges the obvious, that a person who is cruel to animals, who enjoys seeing an animal suffer, is likely to inflict suffering on human beings, right? That makes sense, right? If someone's such a maniacal, it's always that serial killer. It'll say, yeah, as a kid, he was the one who was torturing cats or something like that. So if there's someone who enjoys torturing animals, it makes sense. It's not a far bridge to cross. That's the kind of person who will cause terrible suffering to humans. Cruelty to animals is one of the very few predictors among children of later criminal behavior. So aside from altruistic concern for animals, we human beings also have a selfish concern about people who enjoy making animals suffer. People who enjoy hurting animals will very likely hurt us too. The problem arises when we assume that the converse is equally true, that just as cruelty to animals leads to cruelty to human beings, some people might mistakenly think kindness to animals leads to kindness to people. It doesn't. Kindness to animals is entirely unrelated to kindness to human beings, except perhaps in the reverse order. People who treat people kindly are less likely to treat animals with cruelty. But he says it doesn't work the opposite, that, wow, if someone's really kind to animals, so then kol shekain, so certainly they're going to be kind to people. But there is no connection whatsoever between treating animals kindly and treating people kindly. You know nothing about a person's treatment of people by knowing that he or she is kind to animals or is an animal lover. Indeed, if there's any connection, it's more likely to be in the opposite direction. It seems that at a certain point of preoccupation with animals, there is a real chance that such a person may well treat people worse. That if a person gets too hung up on treating animals with love, they're going to treat people's worse. In his book, The Nazi War on Cancer, Stanford professor Robert Proctor writes a great deal about the Nazis' antipathy to animal experimentation. For example, the book features a Nazi cartoon depicting the lab animals of Germany saluting Hermann Goring for his protecting them. I saw that picture online. It's a whole bunch of lab animals, mostly rabbits, and as Goering is walking by, they're saluting him. The Nazi protection of animals is described by the leftist writer Alexander Cockburn. In April 1933, soon after they came to power, the Nazis passed laws regulating the slaughter. I'm just moving this up here, regulating the slaughter of animals. Later that same year, Hermann Goring announced an end to the unbearable torture and suffering in animal experiments, and an extremely unusual admission of the existence of such institutions threatened to commit to concentration camps those who still think they can continue to treat animals as inanimate property. Bans on vivisection. That was, basically doing surgery, cutting animals up to, for medical experimentation, were issued, though later partially rescinded. In Bavaria and Prussia, horses, cats, and apes were singled out for special protection. In 1936, a special law was passed regarding the correct way of dispatching lobsters and crabs, and thus mitigating their terminal agonies. Crustaceans were to be thrown into rapidly boiling water, right? Not into water that's just slowly heating up. Bureaucrats at the Nazi Ministry of Interior had produced learned research papers on the kindest method of killing. In the case of the Nazis, the moral inversion is particularly dramatic, since the Nazis' opposition to experimentation on animals was accompanied by their support for the grotesque and sadistic medical experiments on innocent Jews and others in Nazi concentration camps. The ancient Hebrew prophet Hosea, and here it is our line again, saw this inverted morality in his day as well. Those who offer human sacrifice kiss calves. That is so powerful. So I think what Dennis Prager is pointing out is so true. We oftentimes make the mistake of thinking that since I know one way is true, if someone is cruel to animals, it's likely they're going to be cruel to people. So I'll say the converse is true. If they're kind to animals, so then certainly they'll be kind to people. It doesn't work that way. If anything, it works the opposite. We'll say, okay, if they're kind to people, it's more likely they'll be kind to animals. But just because they're kind to animals, that's no indicator of how they treat people. And he says to the point, it's more likely the opposite. It seems that at a certain point of preoccupation with animals, there's a real chance that such a person may well treat people worse. How do we understand that? So years ago, I saw this, and this is what I want to share with you on page 5. I was so happy I found it in my notes, and I found it this week online in Source Online. I heard this years ago from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman in Brooklyn. He was giving a shiur, and it had something to do with animal cruelty, and he quoted this incredible thought from Rav Kook. When he quoted him, I don't remember if he quoted Rav Kook by name or if he said from, something like a Rav of a previous generation. And then someone asked him, well, who was that? That was such an awesome thought. And then he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention it was Rav Kook. So he clearly said it was Rav Kook. And he said, where would he, and I don't remember if I was at the shiur and I asked him where it was found or if he said over where it was found and I went and looked it up. This was when I was still in yeshiva. You didn't have all these online resources. He found this from Rav Kook in a journal, a rabbinic journal that was written in Europe. And if I did my math correctly, it was 1903. It was before Rav Kook moved to Israel. He was the rabbi of a community in Latvia that was called Boisk. Boisk, Boisk. That's where Rav Kook lived before moving to Israel, where his first position was become a rabbi of Jaffa, right outside Tel Aviv, the port city of Jaffa. So he wrote this in an article in a rabbinic journal in Europe called Hapeles. And if I did the math correct, it was 1903. I remember being so fascinated by what Rabbi Reisman said over in the name of Rav Kook. I said, I had to see this in print. How could I get my hands on a copy of Apelles from 1903? So at that time, I found out that in New York City, their library at 42nd Street, massive library, has a huge Jewish department there, which again, it's so hard to imagine this, but they have invested an incredible amount of resources to have this huge Jewish department in the 42nd Street Library in Manhattan. So I remember a couple of times when I was in yeshiva, I would if I was researching something, I would make a list of let's say 10 things I wanted to see. It wasn't worth taking the trip to Manhattan just for one and, go look them all up. and the librarian you couldn't go, it wasn't like you could go to the shelves. You'd put in the request, and the librarian would, in a short while, would come back in a box with those 10 items that you wanted. And they had some really old Sfarim. They had some really hard to find Sfarim that you would see quoted, but nobody had. And they had, this even was a journal, an old journal. And I think what I remember when I went to, because I was looking in my file cabinet at home, I think they had it on microfilm. I don't think they had the actual journal, because if it was from 1903, the paper was probably too brittle. It would have been broken. It was probably on microfilm, and I made copies of it, because what I have at home was like 6 copies. I don't think they let me take the journal to a photocopier. I think it was on microfilm, and you could copy off the microfilm there. So I'm going to first tell you to Rav Kook outside, and then we'll look at him inside. What Rabbi Reisman quoted Rav Kook as saying as follows: that we make this, and it's very similar to what Dennis Prager was saying, but here's the way Rav Kook said it. We make this mistake of thinking that we have this unlimited well of Rahmanus inside of us as human beings. And what he wanted to say is that no, we have a certain amount of Rahmanus inside of us, and it's up to us to decide, I guess, where are we going to deal our Rahmanas? Where are we going to put it? A human being has like a limited amount of Rahmanas, and if I choose to put it, to stack it all with animals, by default, I'm just not going to have any Rahmanas left when it comes to dealing with the people around me in my life, because I've already used it over there. I think that was the way Rabbi Reisman started to say it over. And then and he said it was much deeper than that. But that's how he was saying it on a simple level. And then when I saw what Rav Kook was saying, I realized it was something deeper than it. But again, I'm not trying to shortchange Rabbi Reisman. I think he was in his shir just trying to sum it up in a nutshell. And then when I looked up, I saw it was a bit deeper. And again, it was years ago, so maybe I have this wrong. Maybe Rabbi Reisman did fully speak this out. But I have at home, I photocopied from that microfilm several pages, and now I was able to find, because I have all these online resources where they've done so much of this work, scanning Sfarim, I found it right here. I didn't have to go to the 42nd Street Library anymore. I got it right on my computer here, which again takes away some of that adventure. There really was something exciting about, keeping a list of 10 things, and then every couple months going down to the 42nd Street Library and holding those old Sfarim in your hands, in this case going to microfilm. This is far more convenient. It's not as exciting, but it's far more convenient. So let's see here. This was in a palace. This was a journal, a rabbinic journal. You see, it's called Yarchon Rabbani, a rabbinic journal. And again, it was the 3rd edition. If I did my math correctly, this would have been 1903. There was an article in there called Afikim Banegev that was written, and you see that on the bottom there, again, it was several pages. I just have the bottom here. It says Hemshech Yavo. The continuation will be in a later edition. And there's the name of the author, Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, and he's in Boysk. That was the town in Latvia where he was the rabbi before moving to Israel. So let's see this on page 5. Let's see what Rav Kook says about this idea. This is in a big article where he's talking a lot about animal rights, Tsar Balei Chaim, and let's see what he says in there. So I just took out 2 paragraphs because I think this really got to the heart of what Rabbi Reisman was quoting from Rav Kook. So let's see here. He says at the end of that first line, regesh hatov v'hayosher sheba adam. There, remember, Rav Kook was very poetic. So that's also, you're going to have to, realize that as we're reading them here. He says that in every human being, there is some, no matter who that human is, every human has a neshama. So in that neshama, there's a regesh hatov v'hayosher. Somewhere, it might be buried deep, but there is a stream of goodwill and righteousness inside of every human being. Shebadam mevakeshes tafkido. And sooner or later, that innate goodness in every human being is going to raise its head and say, I'm hungry. You've got to feed me. Basically, I've got an urge to act with chesed. You got to, if you don't feed me, I'm going to drive you crazy. Even the biggest Russia sometimes will have in his or her soul someone knocking saying, I need to do some chesed. Otherwise, I'm just going to feel unfulfilled. And that's what Rav Kook is saying here. And it even sometimes knocks al dalasei lev rishei aretz, on the hearts of the most wicked human beings who may ever live, because they're human and because they have a neshama inside of them. There will be a consciousness that knocks some stream of morality, and they're saying, feed me, Give me an opportunity to act with chesed. Umachrichim levakesh bama lahashkit es ra'avon hatzedek hativi shalahem. And that human now says, I need to find an outlet. I need to find an outlet to to quench that hunger, or to quell that hunger, because it's driving me nuts. Somehow, I don't know where this is coming from. I'm supposed to be Genghis Khan. I'm supposed to be some wicked person. I'm supposed to just be doing evil stuff all day. But inside me, there's something that's tugging at my heartstrings saying, do chesed, do something nice. Yisod kocha teshuka shehi ma'amedes es olam. And this is a chukka, this is a desire that humans have, and this keeps our world standing. Lepamim timtza rasha aritz bocher lo inyan musari. And that's why you will sometimes find the most wicked human being will sometimes be seeking out, I need to do something good. Why? Because their consciousness is driving them nuts that they need to do something good. V'sas lasos tzedek, and they would be thrilled to do something good. Kedei lahashkit bazeh musar kiliyasav. I gotta quiet down. I have to feed. If I don't feed that take care of that pain inside of me, it's going to drive me nuts. I want to get back to being wicked. I want to get back to doing whatever I want to do, taking care of me. I gotta find some outlet. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to live with myself. Whatever it is, there's a gong going off inside this person. It's driving them crazy that you need to do something right. Ve'im hahischasdus im ba'alei chayim haisa meforsemes lechefetz shel tzedakah. If it was well known that acting with charity and kindness towards animal, that counts. You get a mitzvah note for that. You get an attaboy for that, for going ahead and saving a spotted owl, for saving the smelt, whatever it may be, whatever it would be. If it would be that humans would feel that I could take care of that consciousness inside of me that's saying do chesed by just taking care of some kittens. So he says kavua b'min anushi. And he says, "Lechevet shel tzedakah kavua b'minashi." In other words, even though it's really designed to trigger me to be good to human beings, but if I could cross the line and say I could take care of that by just being good to animals, zos haisa behechrech ba im sidor achiyuvim amusurim negdam. This would, so to say, be its undoing. Afilu im hayarak ba'ofen shalili. He says, Az haynu pokshim hamon gadol shal rishay tevel, because then what would happen? All these Rishonim out there, the most wicked human beings, when they feel those pangs inside of them saying, you have to do something that's good, some chesed, they would tear human beings apart like wolves. They would slaughter humans without any type of compassion whatsoever. And whenever they have that inner tang, that inner pain of consciousness that's bothering them, whenever it gives them no rest, I'll say, I got a simple way to take care of that. I don't have to be nice to people. I don't have to stop being Genghis Khan. I just got to pass some legislation that says no more animal experimentation on apes, on rabbits and whatnot. And boom, now all of a sudden I can be the biggest Russia I want. So it seems like the way Rav Kook is explaining this is that he's understanding that within every human being, sooner, no matter who the person is, and they say Hitler was a vegetarian, by the way. You know that I was doing some reading this week that he couldn't bring himself. He felt it was very cruel. And a lot of people in the Nazi party wouldn't go hunting. They felt that was too cruel. Yet here they are. They got concentration camps that are killing humans in the most gruesome way possible. This is exactly what Rav Kook is describing. Is that what is the psychology behind that? Is that the psychology is a human being is created with a neshama. Inside that neshama, the person could have made the most awful decisions in life. They're Genghis Khan. They're Russia. They're a Russia. But sometimes there's going to be this knock saying, I'm hungry to do some chesed, and it's unfulfilled, and it'll drive this person crazy. The only way the person could take care of that hunger pang is to do chesed. But if they enter into doing chesed to animals, and now they could quiet down that desire, now that'll free them up to be absolute as he said, ripping the humans apart like wolves, because now I can go on living that way anymore. And when I got a hunger pang that's saying Aqua Chesed, okay, I'll go out there and march for the spotted owl. I'll go for the beluga whales, whatever it may be, whatever you want to do. I'm not saying that's not important. Of course, we got to keep God's world in a balance and all that. But there's something wrong when someone is getting too excited about that. And that can help us explain sometimes. You wonder, why is it that way? Why should it be that the people who are most concerned about the spotted owl are also the people who are least concerned about this. This kind of helps us understand that, with what Rav Kook's explaining there. But that's what Dennis Prager was saying, is that, again, don't make the mistake of saying just because he's kind to animals will be kind to people. Oftentimes it doesn't work that way. His line was, he didn't explain it, but he says, oftentimes there's a real chance that such a person may well treat people worse. Why? That's where Rav Kook's line comes in, because they've quieted down that inner consciousness, that inner pain that's saying act with chesed. I took care of that by being kind to the spotted owl. I don't have any good reason to be nice to people anymore at this point. So I think that's a wild concept, but that might get into helping us understand what it was that Rav Sorotsky was saying here about these Egyptians. Here you got these Egyptians, they're shechting Jewish kids to bathe, so Park can bathe in their blood. They're tossing kids into the Nile to drown. That's not a quick way, that's an ugly way. They're stuffing kids into walls, but at the same token, they're not going to eat animals because that's Tsar Bali Chaim. This is part of the same thing. That's what Hosea was talking about. Zovchei Adam, those who want to slaughter people, Agolim Mishakun, they'll kiss the calves. And unfortunately, we see that play itself out. And again, I think some people, it's coming from a very good place. They're just very, very compassionate people. But if we see some people who have that compassion, let's get them to volunteer their time to see what can they do to help people. Volunteering at the animal shelter, that even though that seems like a nice idea, it would be wonderful if we could channel all that chesed into human endeavors, because there's a real fear if people get caught up on channeling their chesed, they've only got so much. If they're going to channel it towards animal, there's not going to be what's necessary for humans. Yeah, I think if
Governor Newsom.
I'm saying you see this play itself out. You see this play itself out, and it's scary. But there's a lot of very well-meaning people that I think get caught in this, and they didn't decide that they want to be cruel to people, but they just used up their chesed. They've a limited amount. They've got a limited amount of how much. I've got an entire day of activities. I got a limited amount of chesed I'm willing to do. If I used it up there, I'm not going to use it here. So I think we want to help redirect people if we can. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. If anyone has anything they'd like to